I remember the exact second my life pivoted. Not the day the judge slammed his gavel, granting Craig the house I built and the savings I worked 2 jobs for. Not the moment he smirked across the courtroom while his lawyer called me unstable and unfit. Not even when I walked out of the courthouse barefoot because he'd hidden my shoes from the car he kept. No. It was 3 days later at a weathered cafe on River Street in Savannah, sitting across from a woman I'd never met. I'd offered her a refill of my coffee because she looked cold and lonely. She thanked me softly, took one sip, and then slipped a crumpled napkin into my hand. "There's someone you need to call," she whispered. "Your ex-husband thinks he's won, but that man destroyed lives before yours, and someone's finally ready to make him pay." Then she stood up and vanished into the crowd like a ghost. I opened the napkin. A name, a number, and 2 chilling words underlined, "Trust him." I had no idea that this moment would unravel everything I thought I knew about Craig Bennett, or myself, and I certainly never imagined that justice, real justice, could be so poetic. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where everything truly began to fall apart. For 10 years, I was Rachel Bennett, wife of Craig Bennett, a rising commercial realtor in Savannah, Georgia. I was a preschool teacher who loved her job, loved her husband, and believed in the future we were building together. I'd given up my dream of opening my own daycare to support Craig's career, maxed out my credit cards during his lean times, and stood by him when nobody else would. "You're my rock, Rachel," he used to say, kissing my forehead in that way that made me feel both cherished and somehow small. What I didn't see, what I refused to see, was how he chipped away at me, piece by piece. The passwords to our accounts that mysteriously changed monthly. The friends who gradually stopped calling because Craig always had some reason why we couldn't see them. The way my ideas became his ideas in public conversations. The quiet suggestions that maybe I wasn't remembering things correctly. "Babe, we never discussed opening a daycare this year. You know we can't afford that with the investment property we're buying," he'd say, though I clearly remembered our conversation about postponing the property. I was a frog and slowly heating water, not realizing I was being cooked alive until it was too late. The end came swiftly, brutally. I found a text message on his phone one morning, just a glimpse before he snatched it away. "She still doesn't suspect anything?" Followed by his reply, "Rachel trusts me completely. It's almost too easy." When confronted, Craig didn't deny it. He laughed. Actually laughed. "It's been over a year, Rachel. Melissa's 28 and ambitious. We understand each other. We've been married 10 years, I whispered, my voice suddenly unfamiliar to my own ears. "And you've been holding me back for at least 5 of them." His eyes were cold, like I was looking at a stranger wearing my husband's face. I need someone who can keep up, not someone who's content teaching finger painting to 4-year-olds. 2 weeks later, I discovered what the something was that I didn't suspect. While I was signing what Craig had described as routine paperwork to consolidate our assets, I was actually signing away my rights to our property, the house I had helped pay for with my teacher's salary, the savings I'd contributed to faithfully. By the time I realized what had happened, Craig had already filed for divorce and moved Melissa into our home, my home, the one with the kitchen I'd painted myself, the garden I'd planted, the porch swing where I'd graded papers and dreamed of our future together. In court, it got uglier. Craig's attorney, Harlan Pierce, a shark in an expensive suit, painted me as emotionally unstable. He twisted my therapy sessions, started because of my increasing anxiety in my marriage, into evidence of my inability to cope with adult responsibilities. He presented my panic attacks as proof of my erratic behavior. "Your Honor," Harlan said, his voice dripping with false concern, "Mrs. Bennett has been increasingly paranoid, accusing my client of manipulating her, when in fact, he's been protecting their joint assets from her impulsive decisions." I sat there, numb, watching as my life was dismantled by lies. When the judge awarded Craig the house, the car, and half of what little savings remained after Craig had already drained most of our accounts, I felt something break inside me. The final insult came when Craig was awarded custody of Cooper, our aging golden retriever. Not because he wanted him, but because he knew how much I loved that dog. As we stood to leave the courtroom, Craig caught my eye across the room and winked. Actually winked as if to say, "Game over. I win." I left the courthouse in a daze, realizing I'd have to call an Uber because the car, my car, now belonged to him. As I fumbled for my phone, I discovered something else. My shoes were missing from the bag I'd brought. Craig had taken them while I was in the restroom. Before the hearing, leaving me to walk barefoot across the hot pavement of the courthouse steps. It was a small cruelty, meaningless in the grand scheme, but somehow it broke me more than everything else combined. That night, I slept on my best friend Mira's couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd become so disposable. For the next 3 days, I moved through life like a ghost. I picked up extra shifts at the preschool, smiling for the children while feeling hollow inside. I avoided calls from concerned friends. I walked for hours along Savannah's riverfront, just to feel like I still existed. That's how I ended up at that tiny cafe on River Street, the one tourists never find, with mismatched chairs and coffee that tastes like it was made by someone who actually cares. I now sat there, watching raindrops race down the window when I noticed her. A woman about my age, maybe older, with tired eyes but a spine like steel. She was clutching an empty cup, staring out at the rain with such intensity that I felt compelled to speak. "Would you like some coffee?" I ordered too much. She looked at me, through me almost, with eyes that had seen too much. "Thank you," she said, softly accepting the offer. We sat in silence for several minutes before she spoke again. "You're recently divorced." Not a question. "How did you know?" I recognized the look, the hollow feeling behind your eyes. I had it once too. And that's when everything changed. That's when she slipped me the napkin that would lead me to Jim Abernathy, and to the truth about Craig Bennett that I never could have imagined. The napkin sat in my purse for 5 days. I'd take it out sometimes, stare at the name, Jim Abernathy, and the phone number written in precise, tight handwriting. Trust him. Those 2 words haunted me. Trust wasn't something I had in abundance these days. I was staying at Mira's apartment, sleeping on a pull-out sofa that folded away each morning to hide the evidence of my displacement. Mira, a computer programmer who'd never liked Craig, his eyes are too close together, Rach. Never trust a man whose eyes are too close together, had welcomed me without question. "Stay as long as you need," she'd said, clearing out half her closet. "Mi casa es su casa, especially since that bastard took yours." On the 6th day after meeting the mysterious woman, I checked my bank account. 38 or 27. That's what remained of my life savings after paying the retainer for a lawyer who ultimately couldn't outmaneuver Craig's legal team. I couldn't keep sleeping on Mira's couch forever. The preschool had given me all the extra hours they could, but it wasn't enough. I needed something, a sign, a direction. That night, I took out the napkin again. "Who is he?" Mira asked, peering over my shoulder. "I don't know. Some woman at a cafe gave me his number. Said he knew something about Craig." Mira raised an eyebrow. "Mysterious cafe women passing notes? This is very spy movie, Rach." "It's probably nothing," I said, folding the napkin again. "Or it's everything," Mira countered. "Call him. What's the worst that could happen? He could be a serial killer. Then I'll avenge your death and they'll make a Netflix documentary about us," she said with a wink. "Seriously, though, call him." I waited until Mira went to bed, then sat on the fire escape outside her window, the night air heavy with jasmine and car exhaust. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Rachel Bennett. A man's voice, steady and certain. My breath caught. "How did you know it was me?" "I've been waiting for your call." His voice was weathered, like old leather that had been softened by time and use. "Naomi said you might not call right away, that you'd need time." "Naomi? Is that her name? The woman from the cafe?" "Yes, one of Craig's earlier projects." A chill ran through me despite the warm night. "Who are you?" "Jim Abernathy, former investigator, with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Now retired, officially, at least." "And what do you want with me?" A pause. "It's not what I want with you, Mrs. Bennett. It's what I can do for you. And for the others." "Others?" "Craig Bennett has a pattern. You're not his first victim, and without intervention, you won't be his last." Victim. The word stung. I'd never thought of myself that way. "I'd like to meet with you," he continued. "In person. There are things you need to know about your ex-husband, things that might help you reclaim what's yours." I should have been suspicious, should have hung up, but something in his voice, a certainty, a steadiness, made me believe him. When and where? "Tomorrow. Diner off Highway 17 just past the county line. Noon. Come alone, but tell someone." "Where you're going?" The line went dead before I could respond. The next day, I borrowed Mira's car, a temperamental Honda Civic that protested at speeds over 50, and drove to the meeting place. The diner looked like it had been forgotten by time, a chrome-trimmed building with a flickering neon sign and windows clouded by decades of grease and steam. Inside, only 3 tables were occupied. A trucker nursing a coffee at the counter, an elderly couple sharing a slice of pie, and in the back corner booth, a man who had to be in his 70s, with silver hair and watchful eyes. He nodded once when our gazes met, and I knew it was him. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Jim," he corrected, pushing a mug of coffee toward me. "I took the liberty of ordering for you. Black, 1 sugar." I stared at him. "How did you know how I take my coffee?" A small smile creased his weathered face. "I've been investigating your husband for 12 years, Mrs. Bennett. I know more about your life than you might be comfortable with." "Ex-husband," I corrected automatically. "And why? Why, Craig?" Jim took a deliberate sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. "Because Craig Bennett isn't just a manipulative husband. He's a con man, a fraud, and in my professional opinion, a sociopath. And he's hurt people I care about." For the next hour, Jim Abernathy laid out a history I couldn't have imagined. Craig Bennett, my Craig, had a past I knew nothing about. Before me, there had been 2 other wives, both left financially ruined. There were investment scams, targeting elderly clients, tax fraud, identity theft, and always, he slipped away untouched. "He's careful," Jim explained, "creates legal shields for himself, makes his victims seem unreliable, uses people's trust against them." My coffee grew cold as I listened, my stomach knotting with each new revelation. But why tell me this now? It's too late. The divorce is final. He won. Jim leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because you have something none of the others had. Proof." "What are you talking about? I don't have anything. He took everything." "Not everything, Rachel." For the first time, he used my first name. "You have your experience, your knowledge, access to information others don't. And most importantly, you have us now." "Us?" "Me, Naomi, others, who want to see Craig Bennett finally face consequences." "I don't want revenge," I said softly, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I just want my life back." Jim's eyes softened slightly. "This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. Not just for you, but for everyone he's hurt, and those he will hurt if nobody stops him." He slid a folder across the table. "Take this home. Read it. Think about it. Inside is everything I've gathered on Craig over the years. It's not enough for legal action, not yet, but with your help, it could be." I stared at the folder, afraid to touch it. What would I have to do? Nothing illegal, nothing that would compromise your integrity. Just help us fill in the blanks, give us the missing pieces. The waitress appeared, refilling Jim's cup. He waited until she moved away before speaking again. "You may not want revenge, Rachel, but I promise you, you deserve justice, and so do the women before you." I thought about Craig's smirk in the courtroom, the wink, the stolen shoes, the way he'd made me feel small for years without me even realizing it. I picked up the folder. "I'll think about it," I said. Jim nodded, satisfied. "That's all I ask. For now." As I drove back to Mira's apartment, the folder on the passenger seat felt heavier than its physical weight should allow. Inside were secrets, truths I wasn't sure I was ready to face. But also, maybe, a path forward. A way to reclaim not just what Craig had taken from me, but something I'd lost long before the divorce. My power. That night, after Mira had gone to bed, I opened the folder and began to read. And with each page, each photograph, each transcript, I felt something shift inside me, something that had been bent and broken, slowly straightening, finding its strength again. The woman in the cafe, Naomi, had been right after all. Craig would pay. Not because I wanted revenge, but because the truth, once seen, couldn't be unseen. And I was finally, ready to see clearly. The I-cheat file Jim gave me was meticulous, a chronicle of destruction spanning 15 years. Craig Bennett wasn't just my nightmare. He was a recurring horror in multiple women's lives. Before me, there had been Naomi Ellison, and before her, a woman named Diane Mercer. Each story followed the same pattern: charm, isolation, gaslighting, financial entrapment, and finally, abandonment. I stayed up all night, reading, my stomach churning. There were bank statements showing suspicious transfers, copies of falsified documents, and witness statements from business associates who'd had misgivings but no proof. Jim had been tracking Craig for years, building a case piece by tiny piece, but he was still missing the smoking gun, concrete evidence that would tie everything together. The next morning, bleary-eyed but resolved, I called Jim. "I'm in," I said simply. "Good," he replied, as if he'd never doubted. "Meet me at Forsyth Park near the fountain. 3:00. When I arrived, Jim wasn't alone. Beside him on the bench sat the woman from the cafe, Naomi. Up close in daylight, I could see the similarity in our situations etched in the tight lines around her eyes, the cautious way she held herself. But there was something else there too, a hardness, a resolve that I envied. "Hello, Rachel," she said, extending her hand. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." I shook her hand, feeling the strange intimacy of touching someone who had shared my bed, my husband, my pain, though years apart. "How did he get you?" I asked, the question escaping before I could filter it. A sad smile flickered across her face. "The same way he got you, I imagine. He made me feel special, then made me feel crazy. Classic playbook." Jim cleared his throat. "We're not here to compare wounds. We're here to build a case." We spent the next hour strategizing. Jim needed documentation I might still have access to. Emails, text messages, financial records Craig might have overlooked. "He thinks you're broken," Naomi explained. "That's his mistake. He never imagines his victims will fight back. We're just stepping stones to him." "I don't have much," I admitted. He was thorough. "But you have your memories," Jim pointed out. "You know where to look, what questions to ask. And most importantly, people still trust you." That was true. Despite Craig's attempts to paint me as unstable, my colleagues at the preschool had rallied around me. Parents of my students sent supportive messages. I still had credibility in the community, unlike Craig, whose reputation had always been built on carefully cultivated appearances. We formed a plan. I would reach out to Craig's former business associates, people who might have seen red flags but kept quiet. Naomi would connect with other women in Craig's past, creating a timeline of his schemes. Jim would use his investigative skills to follow the money trail. "What's your stake in this?" I finally asked Jim. "Why do you care so much about bringing Craig down?" Jim's weathered face grew still, his eyes distant. "Diane Mercer was my goddaughter. After Craig destroyed her life, she drove her car into Blackwater Creek. They ruled it an accident, but I knew better." His voice grew hard. "I couldn't save her, but I can make damn sure he never hurts anyone else." The weight of his words settled over us. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was stolen. It was about preventing future casualties. As we parted ways, Naomi squeezed my hand. "It gets easier," she said. "Not right away, but it does. The hardest part is realizing it was never your fault." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Because despite everything I'd learned, despite knowing Craig's history of predation, some small part of me still wondered what I could have done differently. How I could have been more. That's what abusers do, I was learning. They plant their voices in your head, voices that linger long after they're gone. That evening, I sat on Mira's fire escape again, watching the sunset paint Savannah's skyline in watercolor pinks and golds. I scrolled through my phone's photo gallery, past the pictures of the life I thought I had, Craig and me at parties, on vacation, building a home together. I paused on one from 3 years ago, Craig with his arm around me at a charity gala, his smile dazzling, mine a bit uncertain. I remembered that night. He'd criticized my dress in the car, saying it made me look desperate for attention, then praised me effusively to everyone at the event. I kept scrolling until I found what I was looking for, a voice memo from 6 months ago. I'd recorded an argument accidentally, forgetting to turn off my phone's recorder after using it to take notes at a teacher's conference. I pressed play, Craig's voice filling the quiet evening air. "You'd be nothing without me, Rachel. I could bankrupt you in a week if I wanted to. Don't forget who controls this story." My own voice, small and pleading. "Why are you saying these things? This isn't you. This isn't us." His laugh, cold and dismissive. "This is exactly who I am. You just never wanted to see it." I sent the file to Jim immediately, my hands shaking. Then I did something I hadn't done since the divorce. I cried. Not the numb, silent tears of shock that had followed the judge's ruling, but deep, body-racking sobs that felt like they were tearing something loose inside me, something poisonous that needed to come out. Mira found me there an hour later, tear-stained and exhausted, but somehow lighter. Want me to hire someone to break his kneecaps? She offered, only half joking as she handed me a glass of wine. I surprised myself by laughing. No, but I could use your help with something else. Mira, it turned out, had talents beyond programming. I minored in digital forensics before dropping out to join a startup, she explained, fingers flying over her keyboard. Basic stuff, but enough to recover deleted emails if they're still on a server somewhere. We stayed up until 3 in the morning, Mira working her tech magic while I made lists of Craig's contacts, business dealings, and any inconsistencies I could remember from our years together. It was like assembling a jigsaw puzzle without knowing what the final picture would be. Holy shit, Mira whispered sometime after midnight. I think I found something. She turned her laptop toward me. On the screen was an email exchange between Craig and Harlan Pierce, his attorney, dated 2 months before he filed for divorce. The subject line read, RE, Asset Protection Strategy. I've taken steps to shield the offshore accounts, Harlan had written. R doesn't need to know about the Cayman transfer. Just get her signature on the refinance documents and we can proceed with the dissolution plan. Craig's response was simple. She trusts me completely. Won't be a problem. I stared at the screen, a strange calm settling over me. Can you send this to Jim? Securely? Mira nodded. Already on it. Rachel, she hesitated. This is big. This proves premeditation, conspiracy, possibly fraud. I know, I said quietly. That night, I slept. Deeply for the first time since the divorce. Not because I was plotting revenge, but because for the first time, I could see a path to something I'd thought lost forever. The truth. Over the next few weeks, our little coalition grew. Jim introduced me to a former colleague at the GBI who specialized in financial crimes. Naomi brought in another of Craig's victims, a real estate investor named Elena, who'd lost her family's savings in one of his schemes. Even Mira became an official part of our team, using her tech skills to uncover digital breadcrumbs Craig thought he'd erased. We operated quietly, methodically. Craig had no idea we were connecting the dots, building a case that would eventually land on the desk of a state prosecutor. We met in coffee shops, public parks, and once in the back room of a bookstore owned by one of Jim's old friends. We communicated through encrypted messaging apps and burner phones provided by Jim, who was almost comically paranoid about security. Craig has friends in high places, he reminded us, including some in law enforcement. We need to be careful. I continued teaching at the preschool, smiling for the children while carrying the weight of our investigation. I passed Craig occasionally around town. Savannah wasn't big enough to avoid him entirely. Each time he'd smirk or make a show of ignoring me, clearly believing I was still shattered by what he'd done. What he didn't know was that with each passing day, I was becoming stronger, more focused. The woman who had walked barefoot from the courthouse was disappearing, replaced by someone new, someone who understood her worth, wasn't tied to Craig Bennett's assessment. One afternoon in late October, I was gathering my students' artwork when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Your ex-husband is watching you. Be careful what you say or do in public. A friend. My blood ran cold. I glanced out the classroom window, scanning the parking lot, but saw nothing. Suspicious. That evening, I showed the message to Jim. It's likely someone from Craig's firm, he said, examining my phone. He's getting nervous. People have been asking questions, and he's smart enough to know something's happening. What do we do? I asked. We accelerate the timeline, Jim decided. Mira, how soon can you compile everything we have into a presentable format? Mira cracked her knuckles. Give me 48 hours and enough coffee, and I'll give you a dossier that would make the FBI jealous. 2 days later, we gathered in Jim's small rental house on the outskirts of town. The living room walls were covered with printouts, timelines, and photographs, a physical manifestation of Craig's web of deception. In the center of it all was a table bearing Mira's masterpiece, a comprehensive digital file documenting 15 years of fraud, manipulation, and financial crimes. It's beautiful, Naomi murmured, scrolling through the tablet, in a horrifying sort of way. Elena, who'd been mostly quiet during our meetings, spoke up. Will it be enough? Jim exchanged glances with his GBI contact, a stern woman named Martinez who'd been silently assessing our work. It's enough to open a formal investigation, Martinez confirmed. With subpoena power, we can access records you can't. From there, it's a matter of following the evidence. How long? I asked. Weeks, maybe months. These cases take time. I thought about the text message, about Craig's growing suspicion. We might not have months. Jim placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. We've done the hard part, Rachel. We've built the foundation. Now we let the system work. But the system, I was learning, moved at its own pace. Days stretched into weeks. Martinez would check in periodically with updates on the investigation, but the legal machinery ground slowly. Meanwhile, Craig went about his business, still charming clients, still living in my house, still walking free. Then came the breach. It was Mira who discovered it, her face ashen as she burst into my classroom after school one day. "They're in my system," she said without preamble. "Someone's been monitoring my emails, my searches. They know, Rachel. They know what we've been doing." We called an emergency meeting at Jim's house. "It has to be Harlan Pierce," Jim concluded after hearing Mira's explanation. "He has connections to a private security firm that specializes in corporate espionage. They're trying to get ahead of us, figure out what we know." "So what now?" Elena asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "If they know we're building a case, they'll start destroying evidence," Naomi finished grimly. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Months of work, of careful documentation and quiet investigation, could be undone if Craig and his allies moved quickly enough. It was Martinez who broke the silence, her voice crisp and decisive. "We move now. Tonight. I'll take what we have to the DA and request emergency warrants based on the risk of evidence tampering." "Is that possible?" I asked. "With what Mira's discovered about their surveillance of you?" "Absolutely. It constitutes obstruction of justice and witness intimidation." Jim nodded, satisfied. "Then we've got them." That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced Mira's apartment, checking my phone every few minutes for updates from Martinez. Around 2 a.m., it finally came. "Warrants approved. Execution at dawn. Stay where you are." Dawn found me standing at Mira's window, watching the sun rise over Savannah's historic district, painting the old buildings in gold and amber. Somewhere across town, I knew, law enforcement officers would be serving search warrants at Craig's house, my house, at his office, at Harlan Pierce's firm. They would be seizing computers, documents, phones. The machinery of justice was finally moving. My phone rang. Jim's voice was tight with controlled excitement. "It's happening, Rachel. Martinez says they've already found documents at Pierce's office that corroborate everything. Craig's been brought in for questioning." I closed my eyes, letting the news wash over me. What happens now? Now? Now we wait a little longer. But not much. The truth is coming out, Rachel. After all this time, it's finally coming out. I thought about the woman I'd been a month ago, broken and defeated on Mira's couch. I thought about Naomi, about Elena, about Diane, who hadn't lived to see this day. I thought about all the women whose names we didn't even know yet. Future targets Craig would never get to harm now. "Thank you, Jim," I said softly. "Don't thank me," he replied. "This was always your victory. You just needed a little help claiming it." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the divorce. Hope. Not for revenge or retribution, but for justice, for truth, for the chance to reclaim my story from the man who thought he'd written its ending. The storm we'd been gathering had finally broken, and in its wake would come a reckoning long overdue. 3 days after the dawn raids, Craig Bennett was formally charged with fraud, tax evasion, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. The local news carried his booking photo, a far cry from the polished real estate ads that had once plastered Savannah's billboards. His hair was disheveled, his eyes hollow with shock. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. I watched the coverage at Mira's apartment, surrounded by our team, Jim, Naomi, Elena, and Mira herself. We didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no high fives. Just a collective exhale, as if we'd all been holding our breath for months, maybe years. "It's just the beginning," Jim cautioned. "The legal process will take time. There will be motions to dismiss, attempts to suppress evidence, plea negotiations." "Will we have to testify?" Elena asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Martinez, who'd joined us for the informal briefing, nodded. "Almost certainly. But you won't be alone. We'll prepare you thoroughly." The thought of facing Craig in court, of looking into those eyes that had once convinced me I was loved, then convinced me I was worthless, sent a chill through me. But beneath the fear was something else, a steely resolve I barely recognized in myself. The next morning, I was preparing my classroom for the day when my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. "Rachel, it's Melissa, Craig's girlfriend, the one he'd left me for." I nearly dropped the phone. "How did you get my number?" "That doesn't matter. We need to talk. In person." Her voice was brittle, strained. "Please, it's important." We met at a coffee shop I'd never frequented before, far from both my school and the real estate office where she worked with Craig. She was already there when I arrived, her designer handbag clutched in white-knuckled hands, her eyes red-rimmed behind oversized sunglasses. "Thank you for coming," she said as I slid into the booth across from her. "What do you want, Melissa?" I kept my voice neutral, though my heart was racing. She removed her sunglasses, revealing a fading bruise around her left eye. "I think you know." Something cold settled in my stomach. "He did that to you?" She nodded, her composure cracking slightly. "After the arrest, when they released him on bail, he said it was my fault somehow, that I must have talked to someone." "Did you report it?" A humorless laugh escaped her. "To who? His golf buddies at the police department? His former fraternity brother who's now a judge?" She leaned forward. "Rachel, I know what you've been doing. Building a case, working with that retired investigator." My breath caught. "How? Craig has been having you watched for weeks. He knows everything." She paused, then reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive. "But he doesn't know about this." She slid it across the table. "Financial records, offshore accounts, communications with some very unsavory people. I've been making copies for months, ever since I found out what he did to you, what he's done to others." I stared at the small device. "Why are you giving this to me?" Melissa's carefully maintained facade crumpled. "Because I'm scared, Rachel. Because I was stupid enough to think I was different, that he loved me, that he'd never do to me what he did to you. And now I'm trapped." "You're not trapped," I said softly. "You can leave. It's not that simple. He's controlling. And now, with these charges, he's desperate, dangerous." She wiped away a tear. "I need someone to know the truth. And I thought maybe you'd understand better than anyone." I did understand. The isolation, the fear, the gradual erosion of self until you couldn't recognize your own reflection. I'd lived it. "There's a women's shelter on Oak Street," I said, reaching for her hand. "Ask for Maria. Tell her Rachel sent you. They can help." Melissa hesitated, then squeezed my hand briefly before withdrawing. "I'll think about it." She stood to leave, then paused. "He used to talk about you, even after. He'd say, 'Rachel was so easy to control, so eager to please.' Like it was funny to him." The words stung, but not as deeply as they once would have. "And now?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Now he's terrified of you, of what you know, of what you're capable of." After she left, I sat for a long time, turning the USB drive over in my hands. Then I called Jim. That evening, we gathered again, this time at the office of Martinez's colleague, a cybersecurity specialist with the GBI. As he uploaded the contents of Melissa's drive, a complex web of financial transactions, communications, and hidden assets filled the screens that lined the wall. "This is comprehensive," the specialist murmured. "Accounts in the Caymans, Singapore, Switzerland, property holdings under shell companies, communications with known financial criminals." Martinez let out a low whistle. "This isn't just fraud. This is organized crime territory." Jim's weathered face was grim with satisfaction. "Craig Bennett isn't just going to lose his reputation, he's going to lose his freedom. For a very long time." As the implications sank in, my phone buzzed with a text. "Melissa, I'm safe. Thank you." Two simple statements that contained worlds of meaning. I showed the message to Naomi, who squeezed my shoulder in silent understanding. Later that night, as I walked to my car in the GBI office parking lot, a familiar voice called my name. I turned to find Harlan Pierce, Craig's shark of a lawyer, standing beside a gleaming black Mercedes. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, his tone oddly respectful. "A word?" Every instinct screamed danger, but we were in a secure parking lot, surrounded by law enforcement cameras. I stopped, maintaining a safe distance. "It's Ms. Walker now," I corrected, reclaiming my maiden name along with my identity. "What do you want?" Harlan straightened his designer tie. "My client would like to propose a settlement, a generous one. Your client is facing multiple felony charges. This isn't a civil matter anymore. Nevertheless, he's authorized me to offer you a substantial sum. The house. A confidentiality agreement." He named a figure that made my breath catch, enough to open the daycare I'd always dreamed of, enough to start over completely. For a moment, I was tempted. Then I remembered Craig's wink in the courtroom, Naomi's haunted eyes, Diane Mercer, who hadn't lived to see justice, Melissa's bruised face. "Tell your Client, I said clearly, that some things can't be bought. Harlan's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine curiosity. Why pursue this, Rachel? You could take this offer, disappear, start fresh. Why stay and fight? I thought about it for a moment. Because some people don't get to walk away, Mr. Pierce. Some people need someone to stand up and say enough, and I'm ready to be that someone. As I drove back to Mira's apartment, I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd put down a heavy burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The burden of silence, of shame, of believing somewhere deep down that what had happened was somehow my fault. The truth was coming out, piece by damning piece. And with it, a version of myself I barely recognized but was starting to admire. A woman who could look fear in the face and not blink. A woman who could offer help to the very person who had replaced her. A woman who understood that true justice wasn't about punishment or revenge, but about truth and prevention. That night, I slept dreamlessly for the first time in months. The weeks leading up to Craig's trial transformed Savannah's usually genteel legal community into a hotbed of activity. Additional charges were filed as Melissa's evidence revealed connections to bigger fish. Corrupt local officials, money launderers, even a judge who had ruled in Craig's favor in previous civil cases. What had begun as an investigation into one man's fraud had expanded into a sweeping probe of Savannah's power structure. Through it all, our little coalition held firm. Jim's apartment became our unofficial headquarters, where we met with prosecutors, reviewed evidence, and prepared for what was to come. Naomi found her voice as an advocate, speaking to women's groups about financial abuse and coercive control. Elena worked with a nonprofit that helped fraud victims rebuild their credit and financial security. Mira, unexpectedly, discovered a passion for forensic accounting, enrolling in online courses between her regular programming work. And me? I kept teaching, finding solace in the simple joy of finger painting with 4-year-olds. But I was changing too. I started therapy with a counselor who specialized in post-divorce trauma. I joined a kickboxing class, discovering muscles and strength I never knew I had. I began looking at commercial properties for the daycare I'd always dreamed of opening. I was rebuilding. Not the life Craig had taken from me, but something new. Something mine. The day before the trial was set to begin, I received an unexpected visitor at the preschool. Cooper, my golden retriever, the one Craig had claimed in the divorce out of pure spite, came bounding across the playground during recess, dragging a leash behind him. But why? Children shrieked with delight as the friendly dog weaved between them, his tail wagging furiously. Cooper? I knelt as he rushed to me, nearly knocking me over with his enthusiastic greeting. How did you? He missed you, said a voice behind me. Melissa stood at the edge of the playground, her bruises faded, her posture straighter than when I'd last seen her. I've been staying at Craig's. At the house. Cooper kept whining at your old closet, sleeping on your side of the bed. He should be with you. Craig will be furious, I warned, though my arms tightened around Cooper's neck. Melissa's smile was small but determined. Craig has bigger problems right now. She was right. The next morning, as I entered the Chatham County Courthouse with Cooper's new adoption papers safely filed, and Jim walking steadily beside me, I felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened today, I had already reclaimed the most important things: my sense of self, my voice, my future. The courtroom was packed. Journalists from local and even national outlets filled the back rows. Naomi, Elena, and Mira sat in the gallery, a silent chorus of support. Martinez nodded to me from the prosecution table. And at the defense table sat Craig, in an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide how much weight he'd lost, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous tic, his fingers drumming ceaselessly on the polished wood. Next to him, Harlan Pierce looked equally uncomfortable, shuffling papers with uncharacteristic disorganization. Their eyes met mine as I entered, Craig's widening slightly before narrowing in, what I recognized as his controlled anger face. I held his gaze for 3 heartbeats, then deliberately looked away, denying him the satisfaction of my fear. The proceedings began with typical formality, the judge entering, the charges being read, the initial statements from both sides. But there was nothing typical about what happened next. Your Honor, Harlan said, rising to his feet. Before we continue, my client would like to address the court. A murmur rippled through the gallery. This wasn't part of the script. Mr. Bennett? The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who had been specifically brought in from Atlanta to avoid any local conflicts of interest, peered over her glasses. You wish to speak? Craig stood, buttoning his suit jacket. Even now, even here, he was conscious of his appearance, of the impression he created. "Yes, Your Honor. I wish to change my plea." Another murmur, louder this time. I felt Jim tense beside me. "To all charges, I plead guilty." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel, calling for order. Arlen Pierce looked as shocked as everyone else. Clearly, this wasn't a planned strategy. I sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. After the commotion subsided, the judge addressed Craig directly. "Mr. Bennett, are you certain you understand the consequences of this plea?" "I do, Your Honor." Craig's voice was steady, but his hands were not. "I've had time to reflect on my actions and their impact. I accept full responsibility." It was the perfect performance, contrite, dignified, humble. I recognized it immediately as what it was: Craig's final attempt to control the narrative. By pleading guilty, he avoided the public spectacle of a trial, the parade of witnesses testifying to his cruelty and manipulation, the evidence that would have painted him not just as a criminal, but as a monster. Even now, he was trying to write the ending. The judge proceeded with the necessary questions to ensure the plea was knowing and voluntary. Craig answered each one clearly, playing the role of the repentant sinner to perfection. When asked if he wanted to make a statement, he turned slightly, his eyes finding mine in the gallery. "I want to apologize to those I've hurt," he said, his voice catching with what anyone else might mistake for genuine emotion. "Especially to Rachel. What I did was unforgivable. I can only hope that someday she might find it in her heart to understand that I was not myself, that I was driven by ambition and fear to become someone I never intended to be." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the old instinct to comfort him, to forgive, to make things easier. But behind it came a newer, stronger feeling: clarity. I saw the performance for what it was. One last manipulation. One last attempt to make me doubt my own experience. I did not nod. I did not smile reassuringly. I simply looked at him, my expression neutral, and in that moment, I knew that he could never touch me again. Not my heart, not my mind, not my truth. The judge accepted the plea and scheduled a sentencing hearing for the following month. As Craig was led away by court officers, his bail revoked given the severity of the charges and the new evidence, he glanced back at me one last time. What he was looking for, forgiveness, fear, vindication, I couldn't say. Whatever it was, he didn't find it in my face. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for comments. Jim fielded most questions, his official background lending gravity to our case. When they turned to me, microphones thrust forward, I paused, collecting my thoughts. "Justice comes in many forms," I said finally. Today, it came as truth acknowledged. That's enough for me. As we walked down the courthouse steps, Melissa appeared, hesitating at the periphery of the media scrum. I broke away from the group and approached her. "Thank you," I said simply. "For Cooper, for the evidence, for your courage." She shook her head. "I should have done it sooner. I should have seen." "We see what we're ready to see," I told her, thinking of how long I'd been blind to Craig's true nature. "What matters is that you did see eventually, and you acted." That evening, our team gathered at a restaurant on the riverfront, not to celebrate a man's downfall, but to mark the end of a chapter. As we shared a meal, watching the ships move slowly along the Savannah River, the conversation turned to the future. "What will you do now?" Naomi asked me over dessert. I smiled, feeling the weight of possibility rather than burden. "I've been looking at a property on Whitaker Street, perfect for a daycare." "You're staying in Savannah?" Elena seemed surprised. "This is my home," I said simply. "I won't let anyone drive me from it." Jim raised his glass, in a toast. "To new beginnings. And to endings," I added. "The right kind." As I drove home, to Mira's apartment, which wouldn't be home much longer, Cooper sleeping contentedly in the back seat, I thought about Craig's performance in court, his calculated plea, his strategic apology. It should have angered me, this final manipulation. Instead, I felt something unexpected: pity. Because while I was free to rebuild, to dream, to become, Craig Bennett would always be trapped in a prison of his own making, long after he served his sentence. The prison of a man who never understood that true power doesn't come from controlling others, but from mastering yourself. I was free. And that was justice enough. The sentencing hearing came 6 weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning that painted Savannah in shades of amber and gold. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and curious onlookers, drawn by what had become the biggest financial scandal in the city's recent history. Craig's case had expanded, implicating a network of accomplices and revealing systemic corruption that reached into City Hall and beyond. I arrived early, dressed in a simple blue dress I'd bought specifically for this day. Not black, the color of mourning, but not celebratory either. Just dignified, present, real. In the weeks since Craig's guilty plea, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined months ago. I'd secured a small business loan and put a down payment on the Whitaker Street property for my daycare. I'd moved out of Mira's apartment into a modest rental house with a yard where Cooper could run. I'd reconnected with old friends Craig had subtly pushed away during our marriage. Small steps, but significant ones. Each a brick in the foundation of my new life. Inside the courtroom, I found Jim already seated in the front row, dressed in a crisp suit that made him look more like an active investigator than a retiree. Naomi and Elena sat beside him, both having flown in for the hearing, despite busy lives in other cities. Mira arrived moments later, sliding in next to me with a reassuring squeeze of my hand. "How are you feeling?" she whispered. "Ready," I replied, surprised to find it was true. The courtroom filled quickly. Martinez nodded to me from her position near the prosecution table. Various officials from the Financial Crimes Unit, the IRS, and other agencies clustered together, their presence a testament to how far-reaching Craig's crimes had become. When Craig was let in, handcuffed and wearing an orange jumpsuit rather than his customary designer suit, a hush fell over the room. He looked thinner, paler, but his posture remained rigid with pride. His eyes scanned the gallery until they found mine. I held his gaze steadily, neither flinching nor offering comfort. The judge entered, and the formal proceedings began. The prosecutor detailed the full extent of Craig's crimes, not just the fraud and financial misconduct that had initiated the investigation, but the broader conspiracy it had revealed. "Your Honor," the prosecutor concluded, "Mr. Bennett's actions represent not just isolated incidents of fraud, but a deliberate, systematic effort to manipulate financial systems, deceive investors, evade taxes, and obstruct justice. The state recommends the maximum sentence allowable." When it was the defense's turn, Harlan Pierce, looking considerably less confident than he had during our divorce proceedings, argued for leniency based on Craig's guilty plea and expressions of remorse. Then came the victim impact statements. One by one, people whose lives Craig had damaged took the stand. An elderly couple who'd lost their retirement savings. A young family whose dream home had turned out to be built on fraudulent permits, rendering it uninhabitable. A former business partner left to face legal consequences while Craig walked away unscathed. And finally, my turn. As I approached the stand, I felt a strange calm descend. The notes I'd prepared seemed unnecessary now. I knew what I needed to say. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady. "I was married to Craig Bennett for 10 years. During that time, I believed I was building a life with someone who loved and respected me. I was wrong. I described the financial manipulation, the gradual isolation, the calculated erosion of my self-worth, not for sympathy, but for truth. The financial losses are quantifiable," I continued. "The emotional damage is not. Craig Bennett didn't just steal money and property. He stole time, confidence, security, and trust. He made me and others question our own perceptions of reality." I paused, looking directly at Craig for the first time since I'd begun speaking. His expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "But I'm not here to ask for punishment," I said, turning back to the judge. "I'm here to ask for protection, not just for myself, but for anyone else who might cross paths with Craig Bennett. I'm here to ask that his ability to hurt others be constrained in a way that his conscience clearly cannot." As I returned to my seat, Jim nodded approvingly. Naomi wiped away a tear. Mira squeezed my hand again. Then, unexpectedly, another figure rose from the gallery, Melissa. She hadn't been scheduled to speak, and her appearance caused a stir. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I'd like to make a statement if I may." The judge considered, then nodded. "Proceed, Ms. Chen." Melissa approached the stand, her steps hesitant but determined. She glanced at Craig, who stared back at her with undisguised anger. "I was with Craig Bennett for over a year," she began. "I believed I was special, different from the others. I wasn't. The emotional manipulation, the control, the violence, it was all part of a pattern." A murmur ran through the courtroom at the mention of violence. Craig shifted uncomfortably. "What Rachel described, the isolation, the gaslighting, I experienced it too. But I also saw something else. Calculation. Every move Craig made was strategic, designed to maximize his gain and minimize his risk. He studied people, identified vulnerabilities, and exploited them systematically. She turned to face Craig directly. I thought you loved me, but I was just another asset to be used, another mark. And I almost let you destroy me, like you tried to destroy Rachel and the others. The courtroom was utterly silent as Melissa concluded. Your Honor, Craig Bennett isn't capable of remorse because he doesn't believe he's done anything wrong. In his mind, we were all just means to an end. Please consider that when deciding his sentence. She returned to her seat, avoiding Craig's glare. I caught her eye as she passed and nodded slightly, a gesture of respect, of solidarity. After a brief recess, the judge returned to deliver her sentence. Mr. Bennett, she began, her voice stern, this court has considered the extent and nature of your crimes, their impact on the victims, and your plea of guilty. While the plea may indicate acceptance of responsibility, this court notes that it came only after overwhelming evidence had been assembled against you. She looked at him over her glasses. The financial crimes alone warrant significant punishment, but what this court finds particularly disturbing is the calculated nature of your actions, the deliberate manipulation of those who trusted you, and your apparent lack of genuine remorse. The sentence, when it came, was comprehensive. 15 years in federal prison for the financial crimes, with additional consecutive sentences for obstruction of justice and witness intimidation. No possibility of parole for at least 12 years. Restitution to all identified victims, including the full value of the house and assets he'd taken from me in the divorce. As the judge's gavel fell, finalizing the sentence, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a profound sense of closure. Craig was led away without looking back, his shoulders finally slumped in defeat. Outside the courthouse, as reporters clamored for statements, Jim fielded most questions with practiced ease. When they turned to me, one called out, Rachel, how does it feel to know your ex-husband will be in prison for the next 15 years? I considered the question carefully. It feels like the end of a chapter, not just for me, but for everyone affected by his actions. Now we can all begin to write new stories. As the media dispersed, Melissa approached hesitantly. I didn't know you'd be speaking today, she said. Neither did I admitted. But I'm glad you did. She nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Me too. It felt necessary. We stood in awkward silence for a moment, these two women who shared so much history, yet barely knew each other. What will you do now? I finally asked. Leave Savannah, I think. Start fresh somewhere. Figure out who I am without all this. She gestured vaguely at the courthouse behind us. That sounds like a good plan, I said sincerely. As she turned to leave, she paused. You know, he talked about you constantly, even when we were together. I used to be jealous, thinking he still loved you. Now I realize he was obsessed with controlling you, with winning. You were the one who got away, in a sense, the one who saw through him. I shook my head. Not soon enough, but eventually, she countered. And that's what matters. 6 months later, on a bright spring morning, I stood in the center of a freshly painted room, surrounded by child-sized furniture, educational toys, and wall murals depicting scenes from beloved children's books. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating the space that had once been just a dream. Riverbank Daycare Center, my daycare. The grand opening was scheduled for the following week. Everything was ready. Licenses secured, staff hired, enrollment nearly full. The journey from concept to reality had been challenging, but exhilarating. A testament to what determination and the right support could accomplish. It's perfect, Rachel, said a voice behind me. Jim stood in the doorway, looking decidedly out of place among the tiny chairs and colorful rugs, but his smile was genuine. At 73, he'd become an unexpected mentor and friend, dropping by regularly to check on my progress with the business. Almost perfect, I corrected, adjusting a bookshelf. Still need to hang the reading corner canopy. Jim chuckled. Always the perfectionist. The kids will love it regardless. He was probably right. The 15 preschoolers enrolled to start next Monday wouldn't care if the canopy was slightly askew or if the alphabet rug wasn't perfectly centered. They'd care about feeling safe, valued, and engaged, things I was determined to provide. How are the others doing? Jim asked as we moved to my small office to review final preparations. Naomi's advocacy group just received a major grant, I reported, pride evident in my voice. She's developing a curriculum for high schools about financial literacy and recognizing economics abuse. Elena's working with a senator on legislation to strengthen protections for fraud victims. And Mira just got accepted to a forensic accounting program. She says she's found her calling. And Melissa? In Seattle, last I heard. Working for a tech company, dating someone new. She seems happy. Our unlikely coalition had evolved in the months since Craig's sentencing. Though, scattered geographically, we remained connected, bound by shared experience and the determination to create something positive from it. Not just justice, but prevention. Not just healing, but transformation. As for Craig, he was serving his sentence in a federal facility in Pennsylvania. I rarely thought of him now, not out of bitterness or denial, but simply because he no longer occupied space in my present or future. The legal proceedings had brought formal closure, including the return of my financial assets and the house, which I'd promptly sold to fund the daycare. Jim helped me hang the reading corner canopy, his weathered hands surprisingly deft with the delicate fabric. As we worked, he said casually, "I ran into Harlan Pierce yesterday, at the courthouse." "Oh?" I tried to keep my, tone neutral. Craig's former attorney had lost significant standing after the case, with several ethics investigations launched into his conduct. "He asked about you, seemed genuinely curious how you were doing." I considered this as I adjusted the final corner of the canopy. "And what did you tell him?" Jim's eyes crinkled with amusement. "I told him you were too busy living your life to discuss Craig Bennett or anyone associated with him." I laughed. A genuine, unguarded sound that still sometimes surprised me with its freedom. Perfect answer. Later that afternoon, I took Cooper for a walk along Savannah's historic riverfront, the same path where I'd wandered in despair after the divorce. How different it looked now. How different it felt, with spring blooming around us and purpose, filling my days. Near the weathered cafe where I'd first met Naomi, I paused, struck by a sense of symmetry. Full circle, in a way, though not back to where I'd started. Forward to a new place entirely. My phone buzzed with a text from Mira. "Final inspection passed. We're officially in business." I smiled, pocketing the phone without replying immediately. There would be time for celebration later. For now, I wanted to savor this moment, standing on the threshold of a new chapter, breathing in possibility. A young woman sat alone at one of the cafe tables, staring into her coffee with the hollow-eyed look I recognized all too well. Without overthinking it, I approached her table. "Would you like some company?" I asked gently. She looked up, startled, then nodded hesitantly. I sat down, Cooper, settling at my feet with a contented sigh. "I'm Rachel." "Alyssa," she replied, her voice barely audible. "Rough day?" I asked, not pushing, just opening a door. She nodded again, tears welling in her eyes. "Rough year, actually. My husband, he's not who I thought he was." The words hung in the space between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. I recognized the shame in her posture, the confusion in her eyes, the silent question of how someone smart and capable could end up so lost. "I understand," I said simply. "More than you might think." She looked at me sharply, searching my face. "Did you get through it?" I thought about how to answer, how to distill months of pain, discovery, and rebuilding into something that might offer this stranger hope without minimizing her struggle. "I did, I said finally. Not by forgetting or by seeking revenge, but by reclaiming my story, by surrounding myself with people who reflected back the truth when I couldn't see it myself. I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card, not for the daycare, but for the support group Naomi had helped establish in Savannah, one of several across the country now. "If you're interested," I said, sliding it across the table. "You're not alone, Alyssa. And what you're feeling, the confusion, the self-doubt, it's not your failure. It's by design." She took the card, turning it over in her fingers. "I don't even know where to start." "You already have," I told her. "Right here, right now. Acknowledging that something isn't right. That's the first step." As I walked home later, the setting sun painting, Savannah's historic squares in gold and shadow, I thought about patterns, how they repeat, how they can be broken, how sometimes helping another person find their way becomes part of your own healing. In my pocket was a letter I'd received that morning, the final legal document confirming the transfer of my restored assets from Craig's estate to my accounts, the last tangible link to our shared past severed cleanly. I hadn't opened it yet. Didn't need to. The paper, the numbers, the formal language, none of it mattered as much as the intangible assets I'd reclaimed. my confidence, my voice, my future. At home, Cooper greeted me with his usual enthusiasm, as if I'd been gone for days rather than hours. I fed him, then moved to my small porch, settling into the swing I'd installed as a housewarming gift to myself. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, nothing like the upscale development where Craig and I had lived, but somehow more authentically mine. My phone rang. Jim, checking on final preparations for opening day. As we chatted, I watched fireflies begin their evening dance in my modest garden. Life continuing, evolving, renewing. When we finished the call, I sat for a while, longer in the gathering dusk. No dramatic revelations, no sweeping epiphanies, just the quiet certainty that whatever came next, I would face it with clear eyes and an open heart. Not because I was fearless, but because I had learned the most important lesson: fear itself cannot break you. Only the belief that you deserve to be broken can do that. In the distance, a church bell chimed, marking the hour, time moving forward, as it always does, and me moving with it, at my own pace, in my own way. Justice doesn't always come in the form of punishment. Sometimes it's reclaiming your truth, your power, and your peace, even when they said you never would. And that, I had discovered, was the most poetic justice of all.